"Marry me," the lonely father said. Martha Thorne stared at him, one hand resting over her unborn child. That morning she had been abandoned with $3 and nowhere to sleep. Now a widowed stranger was offering her his name, his cabin, and a family. To understand why she accepted, we must return to the Cheyenne train station only hours earlier. In the autumn of 1894, Martha Thorne stood alone on the platform of the Cheyenne train station. The Wyoming wind was relentless. It carried the scent of dry earth and coming frost. Martha was in the final weeks of her pregnancy. She had $3 in her pocket. She had nowhere to sleep. The man who had promised to marry her was nowhere to be found. Julian had sent her west alone. He had sworn on his honor that he would meet her in Cheyenne. He had given her a ticket and a handful of coins. Martha had waited for him since the first light of dawn. For 6 long hours, every approaching train had lifted her hope. Every departing train had taken a piece of her soul with it. Now the final train of the day was gone. The tracks lay empty beneath the fading evening light. Julian was not coming. Whatever promise he had made before her journey, he had broken it. The wind swept dry grass across the wooden platform. It cut through Martha's thin wool coat like a knife. She pressed one calloused hand against the small of her back. Her feet throbbed with a dull, insistent ache. The weight of the child pulled heavily against her spine. At 23, Martha was tall and broad-shouldered. She was considerably larger than the delicate women praised in fashion advertisements. Strangers had judged her size for as long as she could remember. She was used to the whispers, but now the whispers carried a sharper accusation. She was unmarried. She was visibly pregnant. She was entirely alone. Martha tightened her grip around her small canvas bag. Inside were 2 cotton dresses and a worn Bible. She felt the 3 crumpled dollars Julian had left her. They felt like a mockery. A sharp kick moved beneath her coat.
"Hush now, little one," she whispered. "Your mother will think of something." She tried to keep her voice steady. But when the station operator closed the shutters, the sound was final. He locked the door and walked away without a word. Martha finally accepted the truth. Julian had never intended to meet her. He had sent her away to become someone else's problem. Tears blurred the sight of the empty tracks. Then she heard it.
The steady thud of boots against the wooden platform. A man was approaching through the gathering dusk. He wore a weathered leather hat and a rough canvas duster. He was not especially tall, but he had the solid build of a man accustomed to hard ground. Beside him walked a 5-year-old girl with tangled golden hair. The child held tightly to his scarred, calloused hand. The man stopped a respectful distance from Martha. Martha recognized him as the man she had seen loading sacks into a wagon earlier that morning. He must have noticed her each time he passed through the station yard. "You've been waiting here since morning, ma'am," he said. His voice was quiet. It carried no judgment. Martha wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. "I am waiting for the man who promised to marry me." The stranger glanced toward the empty horizon. He did not insult her with false hope or empty words. "I don't believe he's coming," he said simply. "Neither do I," Martha whispered. The admission nearly broke her spirit. The little girl stepped partly behind the man's coat. She watched Martha with solemn, curious blue eyes. "I'm Caleb Vance," the man said. "This is my daughter, Lily." Martha managed a small, weary nod. "Martha Thorne." Caleb noticed her hands were trembling. "Have you eaten today, Miss Thorne?" Martha looked away. The silence was answer enough. Caleb removed his gloves. He took a piece of bread wrapped in cloth from his coat pocket and handed it to her. "Please," he said. "There's no debt attached to it." Martha accepted the bread. The child inside her needed nourishment more than she needed her pride.
Caleb waited while she took several small bites. He did not rush her. Only then did he speak again. "My wife died of lung fever last winter."
His hand tightened slightly around Lily's small fingers. "I have a homestead 3 hours from here. The cabin is sound, but Lily needs more than a roof." Martha looked at the little girl's tangled hair and dirty hem. "What are you asking of me, Mr. Vance?" Caleb met her eyes with a steady, honest gaze. "I'm asking whether you would consider a marriage agreement, one that might give both our children a family." Martha stared at him. A few minutes earlier, she had been homeless.
Now a lonely father was offering her his name. "You don't know anything about me," she cautioned. "I know you waited 6 hours for a man who broke his word," Caleb replied. "And I know you are still trying to protect that child instead of surrendering to despair." He glanced at Lily before continuing. "I'm not offering romance tonight. I'm offering a lawful marriage and a safe home. I give you my word that neither you nor your child will ever be treated as a burden." Martha studied his face in the twilight. She found no hunger, no mockery, and no pity there. She saw only the grave honesty of a father who knew loss. Martha looked down at Lily. The little girl slowly reached out. She placed her small hand inside Martha's palm. There was no demand in the gesture, only a silent hope that hurt more deeply than any cruel word. Martha had no money. She had no shelter. She had no reason to trust another man's promise. But Caleb had offered her food before asking for anything in return.
He had looked into her eyes instead of staring at her body. "If we do this," Martha said, "your daughter will never be treated as a duty." Caleb's expression softened. "And your child will never be treated as another man's mistake." Martha felt the baby move beneath her hand. "Then I accept." Caleb nodded once, a gesture of solemn finality. "I will spend the rest of my life proving that you chose wisely." Caleb took Martha to the modest home of Reverend Hale. The house was only 2 streets from the station.
The minister and his wife saw Martha's condition and her exhaustion. They gave her a warm meal and a clean bed for the night. Caleb and Lily slept in a small sitting room beside the fire. For the first time in weeks, Martha felt the weight of the world lift. The following morning, the air was crisp and clear. Caleb accompanied Martha to the county clerk's office. They completed the necessary marriage papers with the scratch of a pen. Reverend Hale performed the ceremony in his quiet parlor. The minister's wife served as their witness. Lily stood between Caleb and Martha. She held 3 dried prairie flowers she had gathered beside the tracks. There were no wedding rings. There was no music. There were no gathered relatives to cheer. Caleb simply promised Martha his name and his protection. He promised her the respect he believed every wife deserved. Martha promised to care for Lily. She promised to stand beside Caleb through the Wyoming winter. When Reverend Hale pronounced them husband and wife, a calm fell over them. Lily slipped 1 prairie flower into Martha's hand.
"Now we can go home," the child whispered. Caleb carried Martha's bag to his weathered wagon. Martha walked beside him, with Lily still holding her hand. The horses were patient. Steam rose from their nostrils in the freezing morning air. Martha placed 1 foot on the wagon step. She struggled to lift herself onto the high bench. Caleb placed a firm, steadying hand on her elbow. It was the first gentle touch she had received since the journey began. They left Cheyenne before noon.
A pale autumn sun hung over the vast, rolling plains. The wagon jolted and swayed over the uneven ground. Every bump made Martha wince. The pressure in her spine was constant. Caleb noticed her discomfort. He slowed the team to a crawl. The silence between them did not feel awkward. It felt like the shared quiet of 2 survivors. As they reached the foothills, the air turned sharp. Caleb reached into the back of the wagon.
He pulled out a heavy buffalo robe. He carefully draped it over Martha's knees. "The nights out here are sharp enough to cut," he said. Martha felt the incredible warmth of the thick fur, For the first time that day, her fear began to loosen its grip. They reached the cabin shortly before dusk. It stood in a sheltered valley. It was surrounded by dry golden grass and scattered pines. A thin ribbon of smoke rose from the stone chimney. Late sunlight warmed the cabin's rough log walls. It was larger than Martha expected, with a sturdy shingled roof and a covered wooden porch. To Martha, it looked like a promise made solid. Caleb helped her down from the wagon. His grip was firm and sure. He carried the sleeping Lily into the house. Martha followed him over the threshold. The cabin smelled of wood smoke, dried sage, and pine resin. Everything was simple. Everything was clean. Caleb pointed to a small room tucked off the main area.
"That was my wife's sewing room," Caleb said, his voice dropping to a respectful whisper. "There is a bed inside, and the linens are clean." He paused at the doorway. "The room is yours now, if you want it." Martha looked at the handmade quilt of red and blue on the bed. "Thank you, Caleb," she said. Her heart felt full for the first time in months. He nodded and turned toward the fireplace to stir the embers. "Get some rest, Martha." Martha lay in the bed that night. She listened to the wind howling against the logs. She still barely knew this man, yet she slept without fearing the morning. The next day, the sun broke over the jagged mountain peaks. Martha woke to the sound of a crackling fire. Lily was sitting on the floor. She was playing with a carved wooden doll. Caleb was already outside. The rhythmic ring of his axe echoed through the valley. Martha went to the pantry and opened the heavy wooden door. She found flour, lard, and dried apples. There was a crock of milk Caleb had drawn from the family cow that morning. She even found a small jar of precious cinnamon. Her mother had taught her well. She knew how to turn simple provisions into a meal. Martha began to move around the kitchen with purpose. She worked the bread dough with steady, practiced hands. She softened the dried apples in warm water and seasoned them with cinnamon. By the time Caleb returned, the cabin was transformed. It smelled of warm bread and cinnamon. He stopped in the doorway. The cold air clung to his coat. He looked at the table spread with food. A small, rare smile touched his weathered lips. "It's been a long, dark time since this house smelled of life," he said. Lily ran to the table. Her eyes were wide with wonder. "Can I have some, Mama Martha?" she asked. The word Mama stopped Martha's breath. Caleb did not correct the child. He only looked at Martha. His eyes were bright with a gratitude he could not voice. Martha sat down and gave Lily a thick, warm slice. "Of course you can, sweetheart." That single word did not make Martha Lily's mother, but it was the beginning of a love that would grow stronger with each passing day. The weeks passed in a blur of hard work. The depression that followed the panic of 1893 had reduced wages and driven farm prices painfully low. Isolated families like the Vances measured survival in flour, firewood, and food stored before winter. Yet inside their small valley, Martha and Caleb were building something money could not buy. Martha did the chores her heavy body would allow. She mended Caleb's rugged work shirts with delicate stitches. She taught Lily her letters using the old Bible. Caleb worked from dawn until the light began to fade. He repaired the barn and strengthened its doors before the brutal winter arrived. However, that peace was tested on a Tuesday in November. Caleb had gone into the distant town for winter supplies. Martha was sweeping dry pine needles from the cabin porch. Lily was playing nearby with her wooden doll. The child inside Martha rested low and heavy. She had to pause often for breath. She leaned against the porch rail until the pressure eased. Suddenly, a fine black carriage pulled up to the gate. 2 women from the town's high social circle stepped out. They wore silk dresses and hats with exotic feathers. Martha quietly sent Lily inside before the visitors reached the porch. Their eyes traveled over Martha's broad frame. They stared at her advanced pregnancy with disdain.
"Are you the one Caleb Vance brought home from the tracks?" one asked. Her voice was as cold as mountain runoff.
Martha straightened her back. She refused to look down. "I am Mrs. Vance," she said with quiet dignity. The women shared a sharp, mocking look. "We heard Caleb married under unusual circumstances," the other said. "A child born so soon after a wedding is a stain on this valley." Martha felt the venomous sting of their words. "How God made me is no concern of yours," Martha said. "The mountains don't care how much space I take up."
"And neither does the man who built this house," the women scoffed. "He is a lonely, broken man," the first one spat. "He would have taken any stray who could cook a meal. Don't let yourself believe this is love, Martha. This isn't a marriage. It's just cold, hard charity." The women turned away and climbed back into their carriage. They disappeared down the road in a trail of dust. "Charity," Martha whispered to the empty air.
The word followed her for the rest of the day. Had Caleb truly chosen her, or had he merely hired a cook with a respectable name? When Caleb returned that evening, he found the cabin dark. Martha was sitting beside the hearth, where the fire had burned dangerously low. Her face was buried in her hands. "What happened, Martha?" She told him everything. Her voice was trembling with hurt. Caleb walked across the room.
He knelt in front of her chair. He took her work-worn hands into his own. "I did not marry you out of pity," Caleb said firmly. "Pity would have offered you a meal and walked away." His eyes searched hers. "I married you because I saw strength in you. You had been abandoned and humiliated, yet the first thing you did was comfort the child inside you." Martha's tears slipped freely now. Caleb did not look away.
"This house had food and a roof before you came, but it did not feel alive. You gave Lily laughter again. You gave me a reason to come home before dark." His thumb brushed across her knuckles. "If the women in town call that charity, they don't know love. Your past does not frighten me. I have never measured your worth by your appearance. When I look at you, I see the woman who saved my family. You are my wife before God and in my heart." Caleb rested one hand gently over hers. "And when this child is born, your baby will carry my name and have a father. No one will ever call your baby unwanted again." That night, the first true blizzard of the season arrived. Snow buried the wagon road. It sealed the Vance family inside their cabin. A few days later, the labor pains began shortly after nightfall. The wind howled through the pines like a wounded beast. Caleb knew he could never reach the doctor. The road to town had disappeared beneath deep drifts. He boiled water and laid out clean cloths. He settled Lily safely near the hearth with her doll. He told her to stay on her rug and keep warm. Before midnight, Lily fell asleep beneath a quilt, still clutching her wooden doll. His hands trembled as he made the final preparations. He remembered the instructions the midwife had given during Lily's birth. He had never expected to need those instructions again. When he returned to Martha's side, his voice was steady. The pains came closer together. Martha gripped the wooden bedpost.
She fought to control her breathing. "I can't do this," Martha gasped. "I'm not strong enough." "You are strong enough," Caleb said. "You have carried this child across half a continent." He tightened his hand around hers. "You do not have to be a mountain tonight. You only have to hold on to me." For 12 long hours, they endured the storm together. He wiped her forehead with a cool, damp cloth. He held her hand with a grip that promised safety. Finally, as the winter sun touched the ridge, a cry filled the room. Caleb wrapped the tiny infant in a warm flannel cloth. "It's a boy, Martha," he whispered. His voice was thick with emotion. Martha looked down at the tiny, wrinkled face. The baby had Martha's strong chin, but when Caleb looked at him, Martha saw a father's love. Caleb sat on the edge of the bed. He pulled her close to his chest.
He put his arm around Martha's broad shoulders. He leaned in and kissed her forehead. It was a lingering, tender kiss. It was no longer just a promise of respect. It was the kiss of a man in love. "What shall we name him?" Caleb asked softly. "Samuel," Martha said. "It means the Lord has heard my plea." Caleb nodded. "Samuel Vance."
It is a name of honor. That winter was long and punishing, but the Vance homestead had plenty of wood and heart. In time, the people who had judged Martha began to see the truth. Her strength was the foundation of their home. Martha had arrived in Wyoming believing her story was over. Instead, she found the road that led her home. When the spring thaw finally came, green grass returned. Martha stood on the porch with Samuel sleeping against her. She looked down at her pale green dress.
She had carefully altered it after the birth. It was the same dress she had worn at the station. Back then, strangers had stared at her as a scandal. Now, a little girl was calling her mama. A good man was waving to her from his plow. A child who once faced the world alone was safe in her arms. Martha lifted her hand and waved back. She was no longer waiting to be chosen. She had built a life with people who chose her every day. She was finally home.
This was the story of Martha and Caleb Vance. It was a journey of courage on the American frontier. If their story touched your heart, please like and subscribe. Tell us in the comments which moment you will remember most. Until our next story, may your home always hold warmth, kindness, and someone who sees your true worth. This fictional Western romance is inspired by the hardships and resilience of 19th century frontier life. Its characters and events have been dramatized for storytelling purposes. AI tools may have assisted with parts of the production, while the final story and presentation were reviewed and directed by the channel creator.